is a war. It's happening now. It will decide the fate of humanity. The time to choose sides has come. We are the resistance. We are the InfoWar.
Welcome to the InfoWars Nightly News. I'm David Knight. It's Monday, October 6, 2014. About 2 weeks after we were warned on The Alex Jones Show by former CIA insider Robert David Steele, warned us on The Alex Jones Show that a staged Ebola false flag attack was on the horizon, 2 weeks before the first case was confirmed in the U.S. Steele, who is now an author and lecturer, previously worked for the CIA as a clandestine services case officer and also ran as a presidential candidate for the Reform Party in 2012. He said they'll have another false flag. In fact, the false flag I'm hearing about is a simulated Ebola attack in which they actually use biochemical weapons that dissipate but then pretend it's Ebola that's been brought here by Saudi martyrs. And of course, he also warned of a false flag Ebola outbreak in the U.S. almost 2 weeks before the first case was confirmed in Dallas. Now, remember that this was right at the same time that Obama had just flown to the CDC in Atlanta, a very unusual move for the president. It was also a time that he took the opportunity to assure us that we were not going to see Ebola in the United States. And at the same time, we broke the information that the U.S. government had ordered 160,000 hazmat suits. Now, of course, they didn't put that out publicly. That was put out by a manufacturer who also tied it in to the rising pandemic. So it wasn't just a large order that the federal government was putting together. Now, we also had a caller on the show yesterday. It was emergency manager, and he basically said that the federal Ebola response is essentially a stand down. How do we know that it's a stand down? How do we know that they're trying to get it out? Well, as he pointed out, they're avoiding their own disease protocols. And of course, he's an emergency responder. He knows what they are. He said the violations of protocol are almost too numerous to mention. For one thing, the government officials are slow to decontaminate the apartment. And we're going to look at what has been happening there. And we're going to take a look at the person who is at the epicenter of this, a Texas judge who is up for re-election. But before we do, let's catch up with what's happening in the world as far as the Ebola outbreak and the people surrounding this man who is being treated in Dallas. Back in Liberia, CNN reports Ebola is killing all of his neighbors. They say that 9 people are already dead or dying there that were neighbors to this man before he came to America. They said, we've been through this over and over again. They said, we tell people, no matter how much you love a person, it's the health authority that is responsible to pick up the sick people. And of course, they're talking about the fact that Thomas Eric Duncan transported a woman who was very sick. Now, both of her parents are now infected with Ebola. He is infected with Ebola, and the brother who helped him take them in the taxi is already dead. I don't know what's going on with the taxi driver. Unfortunately, he was also exposed. And that's the danger of this, that the government would downplay this, would be cavalier about it, that some people might have a tangential brush with the disease and not get the disease, and therefore underestimate how easy it is to catch it. Certainly, with any disease like a cold or a flu, you're not necessarily going to always get it or never get it. Sometimes several people can be in proximity, of course, as you well know, to someone. One person will get it, maybe 2 people get it, someone else does not get it. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't follow safety protocols, especially with a disease that is as dangerous as this is, with 70 to 90% of the people who contract it dying a horrible death. Now, we also have a report today that a second Ebola case has turned up in the Madrid hospital. That's not been confirmed, but we have had one confirmation that one of the nurses who was treating a Spanish priest there definitely has contracted it. And that, by the way, is the first case of Ebola being transmitted outside of Africa. Another interesting note here is that that Spanish priest who died was one of the 2 people treated with the ZMapp vaccine who subsequently died. So not only did ZMapp not cure the priest, but now the caretakers that were there, the medical workers, are now also coming down with Ebola, apparently. A CNN reporter returning from Liberia was horrified by the lack of Ebola screening at the airport. This is a story up on Infowars.com by Mikhail Thalen. She actually thought that we were being protected, kind of awakening like we see Chris Matthews going through. She said, I expected that they were going to take my temperature. Well, why wouldn't she? Because after all, it was just a few days ago that Press Secretary Josh Earnest told us that that's what they were doing. So, of course, they're looking out for interest. But she said, no, they didn't take her temperature. As a matter of fact, She told them, she said, I'm a journalist. I'm returning from Liberia. I was covering the Ebola pandemic. And the guy kind of hesitates and says, well, wait a minute, I think I saw an email about that. He goes off, talks to a couple of different people, and he comes back and he says, well, you know what? You need to watch yourself for signs of Ebola. And she said, well, what should I watch for? And he goes, well, I don't really know. Same thing happened to the two of her coworkers. They also admitted that they were covering the Ebola outbreak in Liberia. Nothing was done with them either. It underscores the fact that the government is not going to protect you. As a matter of fact, as we pointed out, we believe that the government is standing down. They're trying to encourage this. They're giving people misinformation, which is actually going to increase the danger of this becoming a pandemic. At the same time, we see another case, possibly in Miami. A teenager with Ebola-like symptoms has been quarantined in Miami. Look at the difference in the way the Miami medical system and government reacts versus the way they are in Dallas. They say, although a firm diagnosis takes 48 hours, medical experts say the probability of Ebola in this particular case is extremely low. However, authorities were taking no chances, unlike Dallas. They were taking no chances on Sunday, and they called in the hazmat team, reports the Miami Herald. A very different story, however, in Dallas. And if you want to understand who is at the epicenter of this response, or we should say this non-response, this cavalier attitude towards the disease, it's a judge, a pro-immigration judge, who really first came to light nationally earlier this summer when he said he was going to use schools in Dallas to house immigrant children. There was a lot of pushback against that, but of course he got a place at the table next to Barack Obama. Take a look at this picture of him right across the table from Barack Obama while Governor Perry is down at the end. Now, that was earlier this summer when they were talking about immigration. And of course, for him, it's all about compassion, except that he hasn't been very compassionate with the people who have been exposed, isolating them in that apartment without food, two different families in two different apartments, isolated or quarantined without food. And of course, he didn't provide it. It was provided by the Red Cross and other volunteer charities who then finally provided that. But the most dangerous thing that he has done has been to basically make a show of walking into the contaminated apartment without any protective clothing, while they were having difficulty getting hazmat teams to even show up on the scene to clean up the apartment. And of course, that's the other aspect of it, that the stand down, the violation of the medical protocols, the fact that they are days late in terms of doing anything. And then when they do it, they either do too little of it or they do it the wrong way. Remember the way they cleaned off the sidewalk days after he was taken to the hospital and vomited on the sidewalk. They showed up with pressure cleaners, guys in T-shirts, turning the contaminated sidewalk into an aerosol and allowing people to walk by there. That is typical of what we've seen, but he is being celebrated in the media. Look at the way the Washington Post puts it. No gloves, no masks. They might as well say, no problem. Dallas officials send a message of calm amid Ebola fears. They say there were hazmat trucks all around, cleaning crews that arrived to remove materials that might have been touched by Thomas Duncan, a Liberian man who's hospitalized in Texas with Ebola. The hazmat workers were covered from head to toe in bright yellow bodysuits, green gloves, and breathing masks, but then Judge Jenkins walks in his shirt sleeves. Now, this is the same guy who has ordered them into a quarantine, and yet he doesn't think it's any issue to walk into the apartment in just his shirt sleeves. See, that's the kind of amazing contradiction that we're seeing here. Just look at the difference between the way they treat the ambulance and the way they treat the apartment, for example. In the ambulance, the patient, while he was sick, took a very short trip to the hospital. In the apartment, he was sick for days. Now, in the ambulance, no one is allowed even close to it. They've quarantined the ambulance by order of Judge Jenkins. However, in the apartment, anyone is free to come and go. We see pictures of delivery boys delivering boxes of food, walking in and out, delivering the food that was given by private organizations. We see Judge Jenkins himself going in, along with Zachary Thompson, a Dallas Health Department official. We also see 5 cops ordered in. Look at the difference, the way they quarantine the ambulance, but they have people coming and going inside of the apartment. Then anyone who is in the ambulance is watched. Now, of course, they took a while to put that in effect. It's always a little bit too little, too late. But then in the case of the apartment, Judge Jenkins not only goes into the apartment, but then brags about it and goes to a press conference and says, I'm wearing the same shirt that I wore when I visited the apartment and when I transported the people and their belongings 45 minutes in my car. Then also we have a homeless man who Judge Jenkins put out an order that he should be stopped, that he should be examined, and they had a manhunt for him with the Dallas police force, not once, but twice. After they looked at him and he was not sick, he left and they went to find him again and isolate him. Contrast that to the fact that Jenkins and Thompson are still at large in the community, even though they have been exposed for longer than the man who rode in the ambulance after this Ebola patient. He was the homeless man was the first person in the ambulance after they took Mr. Duncan to the hospital. They want to make sure that he's quarantined, and yet this judge who flaunts his contact with this is not isolated. Now, he said this. He said, I'm a married man with a little girl. I'm wearing the same shirt I was when I was in the car with that family. I was in the house next to those materials, meeting with them, listening with them, assuring them last night and again, of course, today. If there was any risk, I would not expose myself or my family to that risk. He says there is no risk. That is a very dangerous message. I think he's putting a brave face, at best, he's putting a brave face on something that he knows very little about. If we had cured the Ebola outbreak, if we had even had it under control where it wasn't growing at an exponential rate, then you might believe that he knows something about the modes of transmission. When reporters from the New York Times went to Liberia earlier this summer and visited a hospital there, they were told not to touch the walls. You would die. And that was with hazmat suits on. We've seen reporters getting sick. We've seen hundreds of healthcare workers from the West get sick and die. This kind of cavalier attitude is not compassionate for anyone, and it does not allay fear, because once people realize that he doesn't know what he's talking about, once they realize they've been lied to, they will not believe him about anything. Now, he's being touted by Time magazine as this judge who is fighting fear and Ebola in Dallas. They say he's the first local elected official in the world to oversee an emergency response. Well, actually, this article, which is something of a hagiography about him, essentially, he's running for office in a couple of weeks. And so that's what it's really about. He was not so much doing this in his capacity as a judge, but in the fact that he is Director of Homeland and Emergency Preparedness. Yes, he's very much embedded not only with the Obama administration and their pro-immigration agenda, but he is also embedded with Homeland Security. And they also say, even in this article that is highly favorable to him and approving of the fact that he is ridiculously downplaying these risks, they say that they were getting the infected man, Eric Duncan's potentially toxic belongings out of the apartment where he'd been staying, and identifying and monitoring every person whom he may have come in contact with. Why is that important to do? Do you see the irony? Do you see the hypocrisy, the duality, the difference in the way they treat people at the apartment or the way they treat people in the ambulance? You see that they take days to do anything about it, and then they do things that are very dangerous. Now, at the current moment, the person, Mr. Duncan, who's being treated, the Liberian who is in hospital now, has been given a new experimental drug, a different drug than anybody else has been treated with. Now, the drug that he's being treated with, brincidofovir, is a drug that's being developed by a chemical company, a biopharmaceutical company rather, called Chimerix. I guess from the name, you can imagine that it's a GMO drug. This first came to light treating the adenovirus. Back in March, we had a Facebook campaign for a dying boy. His family wanted him to be treated with a drug. They had to resort to a Facebook campaign with 24,000 followers, eventually putting enough pressure on the FDA and on this drug company to get a set aside from the policies normally keeping him from trying an unproven drug. This is something that he developed, the adenovirus, he caught after he was being treated for a bone marrow transplant. He is also a cancer patient, but this, fortunately, this helped this young child to get this drug. But look at the difference between what an American child who's dying of cancer has to go through to get treatment versus what someone who is not even a citizen of this country and brings the Ebola virus to this country. And what is going to happen? Either way, if he is cured, it's going to reinforce the idea of people who have Ebola in West Africa or anywhere that they need to come to America for treatment. That's what everyone is concerned about. That's what Dr. Gil Mobley was concerned about when he demonstrated at the airport, talking about how Josh Earnest was lying to the people, how the CDC was lying to people that they were not doing anything to interdict traffic coming in through the airports or across our borders, because we can't close our borders. That is the most important thing. Whether we have an Ebola pandemic or not, we must keep the borders open, because that's how people like Judge Jenkins and the Democrats are going to get elected.
The globalist social engineers are not just targeting us with propaganda. They are manipulating our genetics. We are being targeted at every level by estrogen mimickers that lower our testosterone and other hormones and natural compounds that the body needs. After consulting top doctors, nutritionists, pharmacists, and others, we have developed what I believe is the ultimate non-GMO organic super male vitality formula, sourced from powerful organic herbs and then concentrated for maximum potency. Super Male Vitality was developed to activate your body's own natural processes instead of using synthetic chemicals. Super Male Vitality by InfoWars Life is so powerful that I only take half the recommended dose. For a limited time, we are offering 15% off Super Male Vitality at InfoWarsLife.com to introduce you to this powerful supplement. Visit InfoWarsLife.com today to secure your Super Male Vitality. InfoWarsLife.com.